On a small pedestrian street in the historic centre of Brussels, there is a sudden change of colour of the pavement. There is a patch of light grey tiles, a few meters wide and about 10 meters long, sandwiched between the tiles which cover the rest of the street, which are of a slightly darker grey. That's not very unusual in any city where construction work and repairs take place all the time, but these tiles hide something special. Almost 3 years ago, on Wednesday the 14th of November 2018, a construction worker digging a hole for a special tunnel came across a human skull. The work was halted immediately and archaeologists were called in. Within just a few days, they found the skeletons and coffins of 6 people who had been buried in the 15 and 1600s. According to the archaeologists, the skeletons belonged to 4 men and 2 women, and were very likely Dominican monks and female relatives buried in the cemetery of the Dominican monastery that had previously existed there. Today, the remains of the cemetery are underneath the workshops of the Belgian Royal Opera House, known by French-speaking Belgians as La Monnaie, and by Dutch-speaking Belgians as De Munt. The tunnel was being constructed so that the staff of De Munt no longer had to transport costumes and stage props from the workshops to the opera house at street level in full sight of the public. With the new tunnel, each new opera would finally be able to keep its secrets until the opening night. La Monnaie has a spectacularly beautiful red and gold auditorium with over 1,000 seats and an elegant 200-year-old neoclassical facade. It has such a rich history that it even played a key part in the independence of Belgium, when, on the 25th of August 1830, a riot broke out following the performance of La Muette de Portici, an opera with heavy political overtones. But the history of La Monnaie de Munt goes back a full 3 centuries, when opera houses began to appear around Europe, and there was a time when it was the only show in town, literally. Some of the performances were by a pioneering French composer called Pierre-Alexandre Monsigny, who was a celebrity in the mid-18th century and was particularly popular amongst the opera fans in Brussels. Why Monsigny was a pioneer and what his special story is will be revealed later in this episode. I'm Sean O'Kerneen, and this is a special extended edition of Letter from Brussels on the occasion of the 2021 World Mayor Awards. Written for the members of the Liberal Mayors Network and any other interested listeners, it is brought to you by the Renew Europe group in the European Committee of the Regions. If you are a person who enjoys surprises, you are really going to like the French town of Saint-Omer. If there was an index that measured surprises per capita, it's quite possible that this town would rank amongst the highest in its country, and almost certainly of its region. For the city of Saint-Omer is full of surprises, and it's hard to know which one to introduce you to first. Perhaps the first one is that this town of 15,000 people is mentioned alongside the cities of Ankara, Bratislava, and Rotterdam as part of this year's World Mayor Awards organized by the City Mayors Foundation. But that will only be a surprise to those who don't know Mayor François Decoster, who is also president of the Renew Europe group in the Committee of the Regions. He has won the World Mayor Public Service Award for the work he does for his community at local, regional, and international level. He is one of the 2 impressive mayors profiled in today's Letter from Brussels. François was born outside of the municipal boundaries, but almost immediately moved with his parents to become a resident of Saint-Omer, a town with an illustrious history and many accomplishments going back many centuries. Indeed, few people know that Saint-Omer was in fact one of the earliest settlements in the Western world to receive the status of a city. The date is not clear, but there is evidence going back almost 1,000 years. For most of those many centuries, Saint-Omer was on a par with the other cities of the region, such as Lille, Calais, Dunkirk, and it even had greater international name recognition than they did. In fact, by the 17th century, its Jesuit college became a major center for English and American Catholics seeking instruction in Catholicism. And here comes one of the biggest surprises associated with this town. The foundation of the American Republic, the United States of America, has links with Saint-Omer. One of the signatories to the Declaration of Independence studied at Saint-Omer, as did one of the signatories to the United States Constitution, as did the first Catholic bishop of the United States. Saint-Omer has maintained ties with the United States to this day. The calling of public service came to François very early, and by the age of 22 he was on the list of candidates to the local council. His mother, however, had other plans, and, worried about a career in politics for her young son, she had a quiet word with the mayor and asked that he make sure that François would not get elected. Unaware of his mother's parallel campaign, François ended up low down on the list of candidates, and all of those above him were elected, and he missed out. Although his mother's plan had worked, it did not last for long, because François became the de facto first in line to fill any vacancy on the council. Sure enough, 2 years later, a councillor resigned, and François took office for the first time. It was 1997. A passionate European, he studied at the College of Europe in the Belgian city of Bruges, developed a professional career in national public administration, and travelled to all 5 continents, such that today he says he has been around the world several times. And all that time he remained engaged with and committed to Saint-Omer. Coming up in a few minutes, the story of a pioneering opera composer and the letter sent to his widow. When the 2014 local elections arrived in France, the time was right for François. He had seen the world, experienced government at several levels, had an intimate knowledge of his city's history and potential, and he had ideas and energy to offer the people of Saint-Omer. The election results were close, but François became Mayor Decoster with 47% of the votes. It is often said that some people go into politics to be something, while others go into politics to achieve something. François Decoster is most definitely among the latter, and the transformation of the city began immediately on his first day of the 6-year mandate. He didn't have to go far to find a gem that needed some help, because nestled inside the old town hall there was an abandoned neoclassical 19th century Italian-style theatre which desperately needed refurbishing. Within 4 years it reopened with seats for more than 300 theatre lovers, becoming a sort of cathedral of culture for Saint-Omer and its surrounding region. In 2016, François put together a partnership that purchased the old abandoned railway station with the help of European Union funding, in order to convert it into a hub of innovation, creativity, and startups. Again, not just for Saint-Omer, but also for the wider region, and which was inaugurated in 2019, 5 years after his election. When he launched an initiative to celebrate the historical ties between Saint-Omer and the United Kingdom, the librarian of Saint-Omer's impressive library discovered in its spectacular medieval collection a long-forgotten first folio of William Shakespeare, which is now proudly displayed alongside the original first edition of Gutenberg's Bible, which is also part of the Saint-Omer collection. Celebrating such international connections comes naturally to François, and every 9th of May the city celebrates Europe Day, with guided tours of those places in the town which have received EU funds for redevelopment. It is therefore not surprising that since 2014, Saint-Omer has experienced the highest population growth of any municipality in the department of Pas-de-Calais. Unemployment has dropped by 25%. The town is more lively, and when the elections came around again in 2020, he was re-elected with a resounding 66% of the vote, in the middle of a pandemic. Indeed, it's the security and health of his citizens which has been uppermost in François' mind for the past year and a half. He set up online question and answer sessions with the local doctor to inform citizens about COVID-19. He made sure that Saint-Omer was one of the first city administrations to provide masks to the local population. And he is now focusing on how to bring back the joie de vivre, the joy to the town, as the pandemic restrictions are eased. Governing is a process, he says. It takes time, and it's about teamwork. Well, the people of Saint-Omer are working as a team to revitalize their town, reclaim its place on the international scene, and share with the world the many surprises of which they are custodians. The final seconds of Mozart's Così fan tutte by the MIT Concert Choir and the MIT Symphony Orchestra. Mozart himself performed in Brussels in 1763. At the time, he was only 7 years old, and it was during a tour of private concerts organized by his father. The opera lovers of Brussels had little idea who the little Mozart boy was, or what he would go on to achieve. Most were probably not even aware of his visit. Instead, they were enthralled by other accomplished composers, one of them being Pierre-Alexandre Monsigny. Monsigny may not be a household name today, but he enjoyed celebrity status in the mid-1700s, especially among the opera fans of Brussels. They knew him to be a Parisian composer who was one of the pioneers of the new style of opéra comique, which introduced spoken dialogue into the opera, and which audiences loved. Monsigny was so popular that throughout 1772 and 1773, La Monnaie de Munt was showing 3 of his operas at different stages of the season. What the Brussels opera fans did not realize, however, was that the roots of Monsigny's talent did not lie in Paris, 400 kilometers away, but much closer, near the French border with Belgium. Pierre-Alexandre was in fact born in a small place called Fauconberg, and was sent to school in a nearby town, where he discovered a love for music, and where others spotted his talent and carefully nurtured it. The school where this happened was the Jesuit College in a French town we now know very well, Saint-Omer. In fact, upon the death of Monsigny in March 1817, one distinguished citizen of Saint-Omer wrote a letter to the composer's widow, saying, "The city of Saint-Omer, which has been his homeland and cradle, cannot remain indifferent after such a loss for the arts. The city has a duty to lay flowers on the tomb of Monsigny, and to honor him with a monument which will act as a precious seed of encouragement for the youth." The author of that letter was François who, between 1809 and 1817, was the mayor of Saint-Omer, the 34th predecessor of François Decoster. You are listening to a special extended edition of Letter from Brussels. Coming up in part 2, the rock star who runs a European capital city, and the incredible, unstoppable soprano, eventually stopped by an empty opera house. The adoring fans are pressed up against the stage, singing every word of the well-known song. The drummer, not yet in action, points the camera at every member of the band on stage, and as he does so, hundreds of fans are visible in the audience. Suddenly, the bass player spins around and, facing the camera, points his thumbs back at the audience, clearly pleased with their enthusiasm. Slowly he turns back and sings with them. The drummer's right foot starts a rapid beat, and the concert kicks off. Watching the video clip of that concert by the Slovak band Para, one can't help wondering whether the concert fans, most of them university students in the Slovak town of Žilina, had any idea that on that stage was the future mayor of Bratislava, their capital city. His candidacy was public knowledge by then. But even if they had known it, how many of them believed that the bass player in front of them, performing in full rock star mode that night of the 1st of June 2018, would be governing the nation's capital just 6 months later? More than 5 years before that concert, in 2013, 2 architects walked into a very old abandoned complex in the Slovak town of Trnava. They had a vision to refurbish and unite those buildings into one single modern cultural center with apartments and retail shops. The private investor commissioning their work could not imagine that by the time the project was finished and receiving awards for its design, one of those architects would have become mayor of Bratislava. That's right. The bass player of the Para rock band and the award-winning architect both became mayor of Bratislava at the same time. If you are confused, the answer is simple, even if it is very unusual. The bass player and the architect are one and the same person. But Matus Vallo wasn't elected mayor just because he was popular or because he attracted a large protest vote. In fact, with 4 months to go, he was not even in the top 2 likely candidates to be elected mayor. Matus offered something to the people of Bratislava that nobody had ever done before. On the one hand, he put together a team of over 70 experts to help him put together a vision for a different kind of Bratislava, modern, efficient, outward-looking, and confident. This Plan Bratislava became an actual published book with his proposals to transform Slovakia's capital city. And on the other hand, Matus did something that the other candidates were not doing. He visited the districts of Bratislava to meet the voters in person, present his plan to them, and just as importantly, to listen to them and answer their questions. On the website of his architect studio, Matus Vallo and his partner say this about themselves: "We take everything deadly serious, but only until the moment we start to laugh." And the citizens of Bratislava saw exactly that in Matus, a person who was taking them and their city seriously while remaining down to earth and approachable. On the 10th of November 2018, they rewarded him for his commitment to them, his good ideas for Bratislava, and his evident humanity, by handing him the task of leading the city into the third decade of this century. Soon afterwards, he became member of the Renew Europe group in the European Committee of the Regions. To win a world mayor recognition, not even 3 years into your first mandate as an elected politician, and in the middle of a pandemic, has got to be yet another unique achievement that Matus can add to his increasingly long list. He has won the World Mayor Future Award for his aims to transform the Slovak capital into a green, compassionate city. The list of his initiatives since his election is too long to mention here, but some highlights include the team of 6 street workers focused on homeless people in public spaces and youth at risk during the night, distribution of protective equipment, food aid, and hygienic equipment by city social workers and city police directly on the streets, provision of sanitary stations in selected locations in the city during the first wave of the pandemic, systemic renewal and sustainability of plants and trees as part of the 10,000 Trees initiative. Matus Vallo is also a co-founder of the Pact of Free Cities, which Bratislava formed with Warsaw, Prague, and Budapest. The pact promotes values such as democracy, freedom, tolerance, and the protection of civic rights, and was in response to the policies carried out by the national governments of those capital cities. It has become such a well-known pact that mayors from all over the world have asked to join it and support this value-based project. Another short extract from Così fan tutte by the MIT Symphony Orchestra and the MIT Concert Choir. It is often said that mayors are the face of their cities, and Matus Vallo is definitely the face of Bratislava today. The capital of Slovakia is special also in that for many decades now it can be said that one lady has been the voice of the city. Edita Gruberova has been one of the most extraordinary sopranos in recent times, and perhaps in the history of opera. Born in Bratislava in 1946, her exceptional voice was discovered by the local priest, and after training at the Bratislava Conservatory, she made her operatic debut in 1968 at the age of 21. But to develop her career she had to flee the communist regime, and she made it to Vienna, from where she conquered the opera world over the course of an extraordinary career spanning 50 years. Half a century of a strict lifestyle to preserve her voice so that she could deliver awe-inspiring performances. She never forgot her native Bratislava, and returned as soon as she could and reconnected with her roots. With a career lasting much longer than many other opera performers, she had intended to finally retire in November 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic forced the world's opera houses to fall silent. Her last public performance was therefore in December 2019 in Bavaria. Curiously, Gruberova's debut performance in the Brussels Opera House was very late in her career. It came on the 27th of March 2010 at the age of 63. Although her voice was beginning to struggle with some notes, one Belgian opera critic wrote that she continues to be a vocal phenomenon that has made history and who can produce sounds that seem impossible for any human voice. The audience was ecstatic to have finally seen Edita Gruberova perform at La Monnaie de Mont. It was a night of thundering applause and standing ovations. But for 6 close neighbors of the opera house, it had been a night just like any other. Just meters away, from where Grubrova had performed, right beneath the surface, the remains of 4 Dominican monks and female relatives waited patiently for their special day, which was finally approaching. After nearly 5 centuries, their wait was almost over. In just 8 more years, a construction worker digging a tunnel would find a human skull. If you are enjoying this podcast, you can subscribe on most major podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube. If you can, do leave a review if you have a moment. It does help. And if you think others might enjoy this podcast, please don't hesitate to tell them about it. Thank you.